Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the generous introduction, and also thanks for inviting me to be here. I love this department because I work with your students a lot, and they have contributed to my work in so many ways. So I'm very happy to be here. So today what I want to talk about is focusing more on visualization and representation and mapping aspects of movement and how that contributes to movement analytics and data science using movement data. So I hope not to present so much on the computational and algorithmic aspects of movement data science, but more on the visualization aspect of it here. So as we all know, individuals are being tracked every minute or all the time. So we are collecting data, information from movement of animals and humans, and we are hoping to, by observing the movement of humans and animals, we understand their movement patterns and gain an insight into their behavior. So we use these traces of GPS tracking data of individuals and also GPS tracking or telemetry data of animals as a signal that carry a lot of information about the behavior of these individuals. And we are hoping by capturing the patterns that these data sets basically hold, we might be able to understand how they are moving and how the movement patterns of form and how any changes in the environment might impact the patterns of movement. So for example, New York Times here showed that although these cell phone traces are anonymized and you don't know who these cell phone holders are, by just looking at their movement patterns, you can learn who they are, where do they come from, and why they are there in Washington, DC. In fact, they were a protest here that they captured. And as well in movement of animals, although we cannot talk to them, we can learn a lot about their behavior based on their movement. So in movement data science and movement analytics, we basically, the emphasis is on the data that now we have. Previously, we didn't have this wealth of information about movement of individuals. So the goal is to develop data analytics and machine learning techniques to capture patterns, to process these patterns and extract these hidden patterns in the data and use that understanding and that knowledge to inform our modeling processes, our simulation. And in this process, visualization is key in terms of providing tools for us to collaborate with other domain scientists who understand the behavior and who understand the context of these patterns better. And also visualization provides us with tools to generate hypotheses and basically uncover hidden patterns in the data that we might not know about. Here in this framework, it is important that our tools, our data-driven analytics, our machine learning and AI algorithms provide means for the human in the loop to interact with the data, explore the data, and even maybe tools to monitor the work process of the algorithms we develop in terms of ensuring the bias is considered in the data and in algorithms, and also for the validation of the methods, and also for data exploration, providing flexible tools to us as analysts, as data scientists, to interact with the data is very important. So I'm following the framework provided or developed by Ben Schneiderman about human-centered AI, which in human-centered AI, we want to ensure the good balance between flexibility and automation in our algorithms, and also provide enhance the experience of knowledge discovery by providing more flexible tools to our data scientists to explore and interact with the data. Here, movement is a special form of data, which basically movement is a complex phenomenon and includes multiple dimensions. So we are dealing with location, time, and context. And context would be the circumstances of the movement, the behavioral state of the individuals, the environment that they interact with, and other interactions that they have with other individuals. So if we don't consider context, our analysis and our knowledge discovery detects patterns, but we cannot contextualize them and understand what we are looking at. For example, this flocking behavior or congestion or traffic jams might look the same if we don't consider the context of the movement. So how do we collect movement data? There are different ways of collecting movement data. One way is the Lagrangian perspective of movement, that we basically observe the movement as the individuals move in their space through time. So like a GPS location of a bird, for example, we observe them every few hours and then we map their locations with a point, and then we try to capture their trajectories. So this representation is called trajectory representation, and basically is along the moving path of the individuals. The other way to capture movement is at certain and fixed locations. So for example, we are capturing the presence or absence of individual in a certain space. For example, now we are here, and then in another time we might be sensed or observed in another location. So this would be when we interact with different sensors. For example, if we have like checking cards or Wi-Fi access points that we use, then that our presence is captured in those units. Or we could aggregate movement information at different spatial units. So these two maps shows a percentage of people sheltered and placed during different timelines of the COVID pandemic. So this is March 1st and then April 10th after the issuance of shelter at home orders. So as you can see, by mapping movement quantity, or in this case absence of movement, we can basically visualize patterns of how much people are moving at different locations in, for example, here in the United States. So in order to map and visualize movement and also better analyze movement data, we need to capture all these different dimensions of movement: location, time, and attributes. That attributes could be the parameters over movement, like speed of movement, acceleration of movement, but also the context, the environment of the movement. So that it is important. For example, if I show you this animation of two different movement phenomena and ask you what you're seeing here, you basically cannot tell apart what individual or what type of movement you're looking at. Jenny might, because she has been working with this data a lot. But without mapping the context, the geographic context and the environment of this movement data set, we cannot really even guess the scale of movement. Right here, at least you get a sense of the scale of movement. If this is Galapagos this is the Galapagos Island, and then this is the coast of Peru. So these birds fly here and then go back to Galapagos to their nest. And these are just two tracks of tigers. So you can see the topography. At least we know that it's not an ocean, it's landlocked, and then it might be a mammal's movement. So how do we map different parameters or different dimensions of movement? So in terms of location, in geographic information science, we have two different approaches or ways of representing location or geographic features in different locations. We take the vector representation as points, lines, and polygons, and we also use raster representation mainly for remote sensing data and to show more the intensity of different values over space and time. So in terms of vector representation, we can, as I showed previously in the trajectory representation, we map each point and then we can connect them with line. Or we can use a third dimension for temporal information and map this movement in space-time cube. Basically, as the time moves forward, we go higher in this space-time cube. And also, if you map the flows of movement using lines, you get something like this, very chaotic. It's hard to understand what you're looking at. In terms of raster representation, we could map the intensity of activity in a space and time. This is, again, temporal dimension instead of basically representing the intensity of birds' activities in a location over time. So basically each cell represents how much activity is there. In terms of mapping the time or temporal aspect of movement, we could consider like attributes, time as an attribute to movement and basically represented with a different color, graduated color ramp. Or we could use animation as a tool to portray and capture time and the progression and passage of time in movement visualization. Or again, using a space-time cube, the third dimension here again represent time. So as we move to the top of the cube, the time moves forward. And then we can capture like maybe the interaction between different tracks and so on. I will talk about that in later slides. Another way of representing time is with a timeline or a chart. So in terms of timeline, basically you have a timeline here. Sorry, it's not really a good the fonts are small, but basically it shows the it's a very famous map, Minard's map, that shows the Napoleon march to Russia and back in 1812, I believe. And basically, the thickness of this chart shows how many people were in the army going all the way to Russia, and then how many actually returned. So this way, you can capture the time using a timeline, or here we are looking at as a chart to look at different timeline in refugee movement and flows. So in terms of attributes and movement parameters and context parameters, we are using Bertin's visual variables to map different aspects of movement. For example, the speed of movement, or environmental variables such as wind or other information that might impact the movement of, for example, in this case, animals. So we are using different visual variables like changing the size to represent the higher or lower areas of speed patterns, or changing the color, changing the size of the lines, again representing different attributes. I will show you next how we make use of these Bertin's visual variables in our visualizations. So basically, in order to use these visual variables, we map them on trajectories here. So for example, the color here shows the tailwind, and the size of the line or the thickness of the line shows the speed of movement. So when you see a red thin line, it means the bird was challenged by wind, and when you see a thick blue line, it means that the bird was enjoying the tailwind and flying faster. So this is the same representation, but using vectors of wind. So the size of the vector represents how high or low wind was. And here, if you notice, we are using dashed line to represent different information, like like for example speed, and the movement of this dash line might here indicates speed. So we were experimenting with different options to see what visual variable works better, and we are still conducting studies to look at different forms of visualization, 2D and 3D, and understand how people actually perceive these changes in movement parameters using different visual variables and display forms. So we developed DynamoVis, which is a flexible and interactive visualization tool. A lot of your students contributed to this tool. Jenny, Mert, and Paul contributed to this tool. So basically what we are doing here, the tool is highly flexible in terms of how you want to map your data set. So you can load a movement data set that captures location, time, and other attributes. So when you load the data, it comes with all the attributes in it, and then basically what you can do, you can map it using different visual variables. You can control the 2D and 3D views. The 3D again shows time as like the animations move forward, the time goes upward. So basically, you can change the base map of the visualization, and then change different visualization parameters, such as what attributes you are representing and with what forms. I show you another video that captures that. But for example, you can limit the timeline of the data that you are looking at. You can move forward, backward in the animation, and also just control the amount of data you're visualizing with these controls that we implemented in the software. So then again, you can select different visual variables here, like for example, color for speed, and then the size for, color for wind, and the size for wind, the movement speed. So to basically, it allows you to explore the dependencies between different variables that are visualized and compare them, how, for example, wind impacts the movement of albatrosses and their speed patterns. So, for example, we are using this, first of all, to communicate these patterns to our audience, to our in our presentations, but also this has been a wonderful tool for myself to foster my collaborations with, for example, I work a lot with movement ecologists, and that has been a powerful tool to talk to them about the data and about the patterns we are exploring, and generate hypotheses about things that we did not know exist in these behaviors. So here we are mapping ocean productivity over these GPS points. So the size and the color, the greenness indicates how much ocean productivity is, or how much food is available to these birds. So as you can see, albatrosses fly all the way to Peru to find higher levels of ocean productivity. These red dots represent where the actual location of the albatross was, and then and the surface represent the average ocean productivity. So as you can see, these birds are smart, and they find all these higher levels of ocean productivity captured in satellite imageries around the coast of Peru, and they don't really stop here for food because there is not much available. And if you want to look at how actually they do this long-term flight, it's about 2 weeks of flights. So basically on the way to Peru, they are challenged by wind. As you can see, the line is thin, and it's the speed is low, and the colors more or less are red, meaning that they are challenged by wind. But once they forage here along the coast of Peru, they wait for a good wind, and then they actually use the tailwind to fly faster. So tailwind is represented represented by blue colors, and the thickness represent how fast these birds were moving. So using this type of visualization, we are able to show the dependencies between environmental variables and the patterns of movement of these birds. Another project that I have, again, a collaboration with ecologist Dr. Smith from University of Minnesota. They've been capturing movement of tigers for over the last 20 years or so. So we have a good record of GPS tracking data of these tigers, and we are trying to understand their behavior to be able to inform our models and simulation, and basically try to mimic the movement of tigers. And for that, we need to first learn what behavior the data captures, what patterns captures. So we are using DynamoVis to visualize the patterns of movement. So this is a movement of one tiger captured every hour, and the thickness of the line represents the speed of the movement of the tiger. And then, so as you can see here, a sheep basically goes around her boundary quite often, because tigers are territorial, so they patrol their boundaries. And it's hard to see in this projection, but you can see the history of the track here and the areas that are hit hard or visited more by these tigers. So here we can also see the intensity of the activity in different locations in their home range. And here we see the frequencies of the stops and moves, meaning that when they hunt and then they move and they search and they patrol and then hunt. So using all these patterns that we learn from the data, we are trying to inform our models and simulation. And one thing that we are interested to look at is how tigers interact with each other in their home ranges, and how tigers and leopards interact with each other. So here again, the same visualization. Here we are highlighting how often this tiger patrols boundaries, and here we are looking at visualization of how close these tigers come to each other. So this video shows that tigers have a delayed interaction pattern, meaning that they don't like to be at the same location, same time. It is dangerous, especially if they are two male. So basically one leaves scent, so one marks the boundary and the other one goes after a certain time to sniff the same place and maybe remark it for competition purposes. So we were interested to not only look at this maybe I go back again. So not only looking at where do they meet, like here, but also where are the delayed interaction, how we can capture that in the data. So something like this, that these two tigers are interacting in their shared portion of their boundary, although these are mother and daughter, that's why they meet often. But we are also interested to look at when these two intersect in a space and time with a time delay. So we call this concurrent interaction when they are in the same location, same time, and we basically are also trying to find delayed interaction when they are in the same location with the time delay. So we developed the time geographic approach. Time geography has been used a lot in human movement analysis. Basically, it captures an area that is accessible to any individual within the time budget that they have and the speed of movement. So for example, if you are moving with a car, with a bike, your speed of movement is different and the area that you can access is different within, for example, 1 hour. 1 hour of biking, you might reach Santa Barbara, maybe, but you cannot reach, let's say, Ventura, right? So this is the area that you can access given the time that you have and the space. So we are looking at this space-time prism, and then how it intersects between these two individuals. So the projection of this space-time prism is an ellipse, and when we intersect these ellipses between two trajectories, we identify areas of potential intersection. So you and I could meet potentially in this space and time, or maybe with a time delay. So we are applying this on a set of data sets of multiple tiger individuals. In the data set, there is a mother tiger with 2 cubs and another male and another female tiger. So as you can see here, we are mapping the mother tiger in red, I believe, and green and blue are the cubs. So they actually travel together. When the cubs are very young, they move together all the time. But as, well, there are some errors in the data too. And then when the time passes, after they reach their dispersal stage around this time, they start to disperse and leave their mother and try to establish a new home range. So using this visualization and the time geography method that I just explained, we were identifying how often these pairs intersect and how, with what delay they are meeting. So now, as you can see, the green actually wanders off and the mother is here. So they are separating. And the dots actually represent whether it's night or day, so it's not really important to their interaction. Now the blue also dispersed, so the other cup dispersed too. Anyway, so looking at their interaction, these polygons represent their home ranges. The red is the mother, the green and blue are the cubs, and this purple color is the male that is in that neighborhood. So the thing is, when we are looking at concurrent interaction, meaning that tigers being at the same location, same space, pre-dispersal, the tiger stays with their cubs, and the cubs are with their mom. And then during the other stages of dispersal, once they start to disperse, the interaction becomes lower. Here is the time when they disperse, is the male tiger interacts with the mother more, and then they have a new litter afterwards. So with using this visualization and interaction analysis, we could capture these dynamics between different pairs of tigers. And finally, just as an example of human movement work that I'm doing, so we collected or still collecting daily movement activity of individuals using cell phone traces across the United States. So this data set is county-based. So in each county, each day you get a sense of a value for the level of activity. Here is the distance traveled or shelter, number of percentage of people shelter in place. So then we applied cluster analysis to look at the clusters of high values that are closer to other high values, meaning that counties that were moving a lot closer to other counties that moving a lot, shown in red, and then blue values shows the counties that for people that they weren't moving as much clustered together. Although this shows that this one is the other way around because it's sheltered in place, absence of movement. So the purpose of this analysis was we wanted to know whether the indices, these mobility indices that we get from different sources and different indices that we get agree with each other, because when COVID happened, a lot of scientists started to use this data set to model the spread of COVID and model the impact of non-pharmaceutical intervention. So we wanted to show whether these data sets agree, and as you can see, actually the patterns might, so if you look at these two, because they show the same thing, sometimes the patterns are different. Some data set captures more of the clusters, some less. And then when we look at these two, which basically would be two different indices, again, we see different clusters. So we were like, we are interested to come up with a combined index of mobility that captures different patterns. So we developed a tool that is interactive, and you can actually use it. It's on the GitHub. You can download and use it. So as also DynamoVis is available in GitHub too. So basically, if you look at these dots, each dot represents a cluster, and then whether it's a cold spot or hot spot, and the size represents how often it became a cold spot and hot spot. If you aggregate all this year of the data in one map to capture the essence of these clusters, we can see that, first of all, two different data sets show different patterns. And then the same data set for different indices might also differ slightly in terms of where these clusters occur. So in general, we thought sheltering in place clusters agree across the data set, but not so much the distances, because it's harder to compute distances from cell phone traces that just get a raw count. So if you can play with this, just like it's interactive. We can zoom in and zoom out and see different states and how they change in terms of their clusters and patterns. So to summarize, I hope that I could show you that it is important to incorporate visualization in data science and developing tools that give us more power to explore the data and interact with the data to basically facilitate our knowledge discovery process. The other thing that I was hoping to capture here is that movement data are multidimensional, so it is important to incorporate different aspects of movement data set when we map and analyze movement in both human and ecological systems. There are a lot of challenges that I'm also hoping to focus on and work more on, like visualizing larger and more complex patterns, especially in human mobility data. We get a lot of large data sets. How can we best visualize these patterns that we are observing from this data set? That's an important question that needs more work, especially as deep learning and AI approaches evolve. We need to also advance our visualization techniques to be able to keep up. Another aspect is that I'm very interested to focus on is just visualizing change in general. Like, for example, if something happens in our system, like a wildfire, how do I map this change in a space and time using movement data that we have? Because they capture that change, but how do we best visualize and highlight that change? And with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and also thank my student and my collaborators who contributed to these projects. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yes?
Thank you.
Sure.
So that was a really great talk, and it fits right into my winter DynamoVis class.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple of questions. The first one has to do with kind of the larger picture of how for instance, with the albatross, is there a way to, once you collect the data and you map the behavior, is there a way to kind of gain understanding about motivation? Particularly trying to figure out why aren't they going back and forth
Right.
at such large distances?
Yeah. So especially with linking movement to environmental context, we are hoping to capture that. So, for example, when I showed the existence of ocean chlorophyll or ocean productivity, so the hypothesis was that the reason that they take all this flight to Peru instead of just hanging out in Galapagos is that because there is not much food available. So then we map ocean productivity, and sure enough, the coastal areas had more ocean productivity than areas near Galapagos. So they do that, and then another way to look into that was to, okay, how do they do that? Because when they fly to Peru, they are hungry, they have to go, and they are actually fighting against wind, but they are smart enough to stay and forage a little longer until the air or the wind is better, and then they fly with the wind because they are heavier now and they need to go fast back to their chicks. So with tiger data, we are hoping to capture like why tiger does this, or how often they patrol their boundary, or why they would patrol their boundaries and this much. So we are hoping to, by connecting to other environmental variables and interaction with different individuals, between different individuals, to capture that.
So my other question has to do with, sorry.
That's okay, I have a question too.
My other question is a technical one. So one of the big challenges of data visualization is where you have data that's very large and big, and data that's very small. It's called the elephant and mice problem.
Yes.
Have you experienced any of that, and do you have any advice?
Yes. Well, Jenny can tell you she explored albatrosses as like a test case that we are using for developing DynamoVis, and then we have another data set, turkey vultures, that they fly from Canada all the way to South America, and we have like years of this data set. It's like, I don't know, 15 years of the data. So it becomes really large, and also the timeline becomes very, it's a lot. So we are trying to experiment with different ways of chopping the data and visualizing just a subset of the data, and making that space-time cube more dynamic, so that with the smaller data set it shrinks, and then with the bigger data set maybe it zooms out a little bit. So these are the things that we are experimenting, but it is very challenging, and that's why in one of the last bullets was like, for large data set, how would you capture interaction? Even like interaction is very complex when multiple individuals are involved. How can I highlight if interaction happened or not? I can do it like numerically, like with analysis, I can identify how often these individuals are meeting or coming into contact, but can I visualize that? How can I visualize that?
Well,
Yes.
what about multimodal representation? I mean, one of the things that's interesting that Jenny's doing in my class is taking the data and visualizing and sonifying the data and figuring out certain aspects. Like, for instance, temporal data might be very interesting to sonify, where when you're doing things that are more aggregate or spatialization might be visualization. So you could start to do these kind of multi-dimensional representations. But I also have some just interesting questions about why. I mean, I know the albatross go back to the Galapagos because that's their home, but you wonder why they don't hang longer where the food is, right? And have you seen any kind of
So the thing
patterns like
is,
that?
I think it's safer for them to nest in Galapagos. Their chicks are there.
Right.
So the reason that they go to Peru, they forage and then they go back, feed their chicks. That's why they have to go back.
Right.
And I think ecologically, I'm not an ecologist, I'm just talking on their behalf, is that it's better habitat for them to live. but
I got you.
but they like the food over there.
So for instance, it might be safer over where the Galapagos is rather than where they are on that side. But
Exactly.
there's not enough food, so they have to go. Do you notice any change in the pattern of how long they stay and how when they go back, or is it about the same kind of cycle?
So it's about the same cycle. Like I think it's 1,600 to 1,800 kilometers, depending on when they land. It's about 2 weeks, I believe, of the flight. So it's so regular, but also this data set only observes them for three months, June to September. So it's not a very long-term data set
So
either to look at changes
Right,
over
so I have
time.
more ecological questions,
Yeah.
like who stays and watches the kids when they go?
I think the kids stay alone
They
though.
just stay by themselves? Okay.
I think they are good with other kids. Yes.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I think in our research group, in the Alistair research group, we've talked about the idea of kind of valuing immersive virtual environments. How do you see the role of embodiment of data spatially in real time? So a dancer or a soldier or an athlete would actually track data or bodies in space.
Right.
So why is that a territory that still needs to happen within your field? And that would also probably include a multimodal representation as well, sound, touch, maybe smell, I don't know.
Yeah.
But how do you see this developing in your work?
Yeah, so my work mainly focuses on whole body movement, like an individual as a point, as an entity, as an object, whole object moving. I do not focus on body movement or other micro movement that happens within that entity, right? So but this is whole another field. I know a lot of people track dance, track different types of motion and try to understand that and and actually that contributes, for example, to robotic research as well, but it's not really related to my research. So I actually have no answer for that because I don't focus on that area, but I can see that a lot of visualizations that we are developing might be useful to if you have a tracking data of like the multiple components of the individual, you can perhaps map it, but I would say 3D might be a better representation for that aspect than 2D, because then you are collapsing the other like the third dimension of the body. Yeah, unfortunately, here in my lab, we mainly focus on like geographic movement, movement in space and time.
So,
Yeah.
but you do focus on volumetric movement, because when
Yes.
birds move, they're at
Yes.
different spatial
Yes,
heights.
yes, but not
So-
their wings. Like
No,
we
no,
don't
but that's what I'm
map their
talking about. I
wing
mean, even if
movement.
you just
Yeah,
think of
exactly.
full body in
Exactly.
an immersive virtual environment,
Sure.
might give you more of a perspective of how the flock itself kind of
Yes.
interacts with
Yes.
the space.
Definitely. Yeah.
Just one follow-up.
Uh-huh.
The idea of when you're creating these visualizations in time, what has been like a fun discovery that you've made with your data? So if there's someone that is new to what you do,
Yeah.
like what is something that you discovered that was like, wow, this is so incredible?
With the visualization
Yeah.
of any type of a species, well,
Yeah.
a lot of the thing is just wow for me, because I don't know anything about the behavior of these animals, and by mapping them, I learn a lot, and then I can collaborate with my collaborators. Maybe they know everything already, maybe I'm just confirming or highlighting what they know.
Okay.
But for me, it's new because I don't have that background. But it's interesting, I removed the slides, but so I work with a group of a network of scientists called MoveBank. They collect all this movement tracking data of individuals, like any scientist contributes to that. So the albatross data, turkey vulture data comes from that. So you can download a lot of their data for free. One of them contacted me for the visualization, and they sent the data to map the migration or movement of great egret. So my student mapped them, and then we sent the videos there, and he basically wrote me a long email. I'm so emotional, I'm speechless. I've been working with this data set for so long, I've never seen it like this. So visualization is that powerful. Like you see it. Either you knew before what the behavior is, or you don't. But when you see it, it's something else. So that's why I'm very fascinated by visualization and how I can incorporate that in my analytical work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So you essentially developed a new tool for visualizing this data sets and movement. And my question is, who is the audience for this tool, and why did you develop the tool?
Yeah.
So because of course there's all kinds of tools and scripts and all. I assume that it was to aggregate everything in one place, but I just want to hear that.
So very good question. I started developing this tool around 2015, I want to say. It started as a class project. I was teaching processing to a student, visualization. So one student in particular, undergrad student, was so talented and smart, and then I gave them the albatross data to map it because that was what I was teaching. I didn't have this in mind. And then he mapped it so elegantly that we started working together. But the reason I developed the tool with him, starting with him, was that I was collaborating with the ecologists. And that was the only way that I could communicate with them, talk about the data, talk about what do you want me to capture in the data, or what do you want me to model. So that was a tool for me to talk to my collaborators. So then we started developing that, and then I moved to Minnesota, then here, then wonderful students helped me to develop it further. The audience are movement ecologists. So we actually put it on movement website, like a link to our GitHub. So a lot of their scientists use the tool, and they bug us about the errors that we see in the tool as well. And so movement ecologists are basically the main audience. But the reason that, one of the reasons that I wanted to have a tool rather than just create a video and send them back was that GIS softwares can be very complicated to work with. Like if you're not in the field, you don't have to just know the whole ArcGIS to be able to map something. So we wanted to develop this as a very easy, intuitive tool that they can just pull the data, map it, change some visualization variables, and see the results right away. No need for coding, no need for programming or advanced GIS skills. So that was the main driver of it. But the problem we are having is that obviously this is an open source tool. So everybody can download and improve it or change it. But for us, the challenge has been like processing keeps changing, Java keeps changing. So every year we have to update it, and I don't have resources to maintain it. And unfortunately, that happens with a lot of open science and open tool that after a few years, if you don't have support for it, it dies down because it's hard to keep up. Yeah.
What did I just talk about in class today? The consumerization of technology and how hard it is for people that are open source and developing their own tools, because every time an operating system comes out, something's breaking constantly, which forces you then to look for consumerized tools, and those consumerized tools don't do, they're usually reaching for the lowest common denominator.
Right.
So it's very frustrating, and it's speeding up. I mean, you look at it. Look at what's happening with AI now.
Yeah.
which is very interesting.
We are also trying to develop the web version of it. It's there, but not super elegant. So we're still working on it. 2 questions, it seems. Yeah.
Just very quickly. So if your obstacle is that these frameworks are changing, and you're looking at a web interface, the web will change at some point.
Oh yeah.
So what is your economic model when it comes to, I would say, as a researcher, because it sounds as though you have two primary things. One, furthering your career in humanity, but second, you're making this contribution to knowledge that'll hopefully stay for as long as we're here.
Yeah.
So, but those are two different economic frameworks.
Yeah.
One is to survive, and the other is actually to make this long shot.
Yeah, so keep in mind that this is just one aspect of my work.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of modeling and simulation and analysis of movement. So you're right, this is just one NSF project that I'm focusing on, and who knows what happens with this after a few years. So far, I've been trying to maintain it and update it. Like this NSF project was fantastic for me to be able to support the students to develop it further and update it. But I really don't know if I can keep up with that if I don't have funding for it. I will put the latest I can put on the web to use, and if at some point if nobody can use it, that's it. Because
Is that just my question, is that a university problem? So let's say that, is it, if you had all the power in the world, is that where all the faculty go, we've given 20 or 30 years of our lives, can the university look at this as an opportunity to make this time capsule of knowledge? Or has that even been thought through somewhere?
so the thing is, this is just a tool, right?
Yeah.
We develop the principles, the methods, and everything, and it's published, right? So everybody should be able to reproduce, hopefully, right? But this particular tool is just, I have limited support for that. I don't have any company that it's gonna invest in there, because how many users does this tool have, right?
That's why we're trying to develop the next step of the open source framework that we're developing, is one where not only will you be able to share publications, but you'll be able to share code as well.
Right.
So that's the next step. I mean, that's
Right.
exactly what's happening. Well, that's what's happening with Jupyter Notebooks, but that's what's happening with a lot of the NSF-funded programs like Wholetail, archiving and dissemination of not only the publications, but of the code in the publications, so that you don't have to redo the experiment every time you want to take it to the next step. So, but again, we're having a hard time because of the consumerization aspect of things. And even with NSF, I mean, even though they put way too much weight on publications rather than what's going to be out there. But I don't know if you know about the new POSE program, open source program that NSF is starting to try to compete with their industry aspect of things and actually have an open source kind of community that's working together. So, there's those opportunities. But it's those of us that are actually developing libraries under the hood and hoping we can keep them working, that are dealing at that level of code relationship. So,
I have another question.
Yes.
What's next for so this project is slowly winding down.
In fact, in February, my NSF is done.
Is out there. Hopefully, the rest of us will pick it up and work with it and so on, and the community will still develop it. But what's next for you?
In terms of visualization, right?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of research kind of direction.
Yeah, so In terms of software development, probably I'm not gonna invest much on software development because of all the issues we are talking about. But I am interested to, first of all, use this tool to do some user study experiment to understand like different differences in 2D and 3D, how people actually perceive these patterns, and then for what purposes is good, like whether we use 2D, 3D, dynamic and interactive visualization. We are actually developing the study currently. But long term, I think I would like to explore like ways to map a large data set and more complex patterns of interaction. In terms of my other NSF projects, I'm looking into mapping change in behavior when there is a disruption in the environment, like a wildfire, like such as COVID, for example, that happened, or in the tiger study, because we have a long-term tracking data of them. So basically, I'm very interested in representation of change and changing behavioral responses. And the other project that I have is mainly on identifying interaction and developing more optimal computational tools for identifying interaction.
When you say interaction, you mean interaction
between individuals.
Between individuals.
Like in a group, yeah.
Interactions in data.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Because when we say interaction,
I'm sure.
it's a box.
It can mean a lot of things to us.
Yes. I am very interested, if you are interested to explore this, I'm very interested to understand how people perceive time using different visual forms. Like if I'm showing you the map of albatrosses, do you understand that it's 2 weeks of movement versus the tiger that is like 1 month of movement? You know, the passage of time using visualization, how we can capture that. And also your 3D environment, you know.
Well, that's why I think, you know, for somebody like me who is a composer that understands time very, very much. I mean, I know time, 40 years of time. And that's why, you know, sonification becomes very important. Mm-hmm. There are things that you can do, you can't pick up through visualization, that you can with the way the body perceives time by hearing things. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's some interesting things that could happen. I mean, you being a possible collaborator in the NSF Major Research Instrumentation proposal means eventually us building the kind of open source, general purpose software infrastructure that we're trying to build, to be able to do the kinds of things that you're talking about, which I think is really going to be important in understanding what's happening. I mean, look at what's happening on our world right now. We really have to understand with change, because we're also working on a big climate project. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening just with the environment and how people and everything is going to move according to the changes of the infrastructure of the earth. I mean, it's happening right now. So it's really, really interesting stuff. So that's why thank you.
No, well, thank you. Yeah, no, hopefully we can collaborate
I hope
on
we
projects.
get the grant.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I just have one final question.
Mm-hmm.
How do other disciplines that study movement influence your work, like in sports, or in military, or in like tracking like garbage up in space? Like, how does that help you think
very
about
diverse stuff.
Very diverse, for sure.
Yeah, well, very much. I mean, I didn't invent this field, right? So I'm drawing from movement ecologists, human geographers, and also like a lot of different moving phenomena, like even physical phenomena like hurricanes, and like in my PhD, I used hurricane data. So to simulate and model movement of hurricanes, I used like even eye movement tracking data to look at patterns of eye movement and how your attention is grabbed by different things based on analysis of saccades and rapid movement of eyes. So I think movement is diverse. It applies to many fields. I started by initially by thinking that if movement is universal and it happens in different applications, so different methods that we are developing should apply to all types of movement. But then as I did this for more and more, and now that I'm focusing on two different applications, I realized that two different contexts, or the context of movement actually is important in terms of how we analyze movement, how we visualize movement, and maybe not all models and not all analysis can apply across the board, right? So that's something that I took away. But yes, I get information, or I read a lot about different domains and then try to use them and apply them in my work as well. You're welcome.
I mean, there's plenty of questions, but one just out of curiosity, because movement ecology, frankly, I was in my ignorance, I didn't even know the field with that name exists, but I shouldn't. But how does this research relate to weather and climate research? Since dynamic movement is absolutely key in weather research and climate and large models, which were really responsible for these huge advances in modeling and computation. How does this relate? Because it's kind of, I can imagine you could input weather patterns in DynamoVis and see what happens.
Yeah, something I would note, very much relevant, but something I would note, in weather models and weather patterns, you're interested in polygons that are changing, like the extent of the phenomena is important. Here in DynamoVis and in animal movement, we basically abstract the entity into one point. And we track their movement, right? So, but then if you look at like behaviors or patterns like flocking and how the whole system moves, yes, that would become very much similar to hurricanes and weather systems as well. So it depends on what aspect or context we are looking at. There are relationships, but also sometimes the abstraction level here is a bit higher in terms of like we are just interested in location and time and a bunch of attributes that we are tracking.
Before the ubiquity of GPS, the movement ecologists were mostly just doing very large temporal intervals, observation type of data, maybe some radio.
More based on field observations. Like I'm observing this animal here, so they must fly to this location, right?
That's why it was so statistical.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because I work with some whale migration scientists in 2000 in Western Australia, and they were using statistical methods, and that's how I actually became involved in building robotic aircraft to observe those whales. So as a solution, because I didn't find the statistics very convincing as a method. I mean, of course they are, but in a way it was not. It was very. It was a snooze fest. It was very boring as science. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.